years ago, there was a study that was funded by DARPA, jointly with DARPA. DARPA is Defense Advanced Research Project Organization. It's the DoD entity that does the really far out-reaching concepts. Here's a good trivia question for you folks. Do you know who invented the internet? It wasn't Al Gore. It was ARPA, the predecessor to DARPA, Advanced Research Projects Organization, came up with it. Anyway, they funded this study analysis that we did, and it was a horizontal launch study. And the notional concept was air launching sizable rockets off the top of a 747, maybe even the shuttle carrier airplanes. It was potential. And the study they went and did a lot of good work. The problem was they didn't look at one key thing, and that is how do you get rid of that in an emergency? They were able to do the analysis and show that in a perfect scenario at your design release point of 38,000 feet at 0.75 Mach, you could get a nice clean separation, clear the vertical tail. The rule of thumb on the analysis is the distance when it's mated between the back end of the rocket and the front of the vertical tail cannot reduce during the separation. You've got to keep that distance. That's kind of the safety rule of thumb that you shoot for. And they'd figured out how to do that in the study. I came along and said, well, how do you get rid of this if there's an in-flight emergency and you're at 4,500 feet a minute and a half after takeoff at 200 knots heavy and climbing slowly? You don't have enough airspeed to release it off the top. You certainly can't drop it because there's an airplane in the road and gravity is never your friend. And that's just the real practical side of things. And to be honest, I'm sincere, that killed the project. They hadn't thought of that. And that is kind of one of the tenets of the idea that I've got. So basically, the synopsis of the problem of air launch is this. Launching rocket boosters from the top of an aircraft is problematic from a safety perspective. It's not easy to do. No one's come up with a way to do it, to be honest. Launching large payloads or rockets from the bottom of existing transports can be constraining from a geometry and size or ground clearance perspective. The airplanes aren't designed to carry stuff underneath. You know, the L-1011, the belly of it is this far off the ground. You can't put a real big rocket under there. The B-52, you had 22 feet to work with between the engine and the side of the fuselage. There's just only so much room. 747s, you've got engines, you got actuators, you got flaps, you got fairings. Even on the L-1011, they actually have to take off the main landing gear doors to be able to retract the landing gear with the Pegasus mated. So that's a problem. So what you wind up doing is you build a dedicated, unique configuration, you know, of a vehicle similar to this. That's what Scaled Composites did with White Knight 2. That's what they're doing for Stratolaunch Corp. And that solves these problems of launching. You wind up launching off the bottom, and you got a twin fuse airplane, so ground clearance, there's a lot of real estate. But building a dedicated, unique configuration as a piloted, powered, bottom launch aircraft can be really expensive. Stratolaunch is speculation runs rampant, but it might be $1 billion airplane when they're done. It's just hard to say, but it's not going to be cheap. They're taking 2 747s, they've stripped the engines off of it, they're going to have 6 747 engines, 3 sets of 747 landing gear. It'll be a 387-foot wingspan vehicle, the world's largest airplane. They are pushing the state of the art of what you can build and fly something. And that's to carry about a 480,000-pound payload. The concept that I'm introducing, and you'll see some of the math here in a few minutes, could carry a similar weight with about a 270 wingspan glider that would cost about 1/5 as much and be a lot smaller. So what this concept is doing is a towed, remotely piloted, maybe optionally piloted, we're still batting that around, unpowered glider, bottom launching the same booster would be smaller and substantially cheaper than a dedicated carrier aircraft. And the reason why is systems complexity. No engines, no fuel tanks, no plumbing, no hydraulics, all electric airplane, fiber optics running out to the actuators, put the batteries where the servo actuators are. Big model airplane, basically. Big model sailplane. But still, the concept needs to be investigated for feasibility and practicality in a representative flight environment. You can do wind tunnel tests, you can do CFD work, you can do analysis until you're blue in the face. Until you actually try it, you don't really know if it's going to work. So that's what we're trying to do. Oops. So out of this study here, there was one really jewel of information, and that is that they put together a plot, a curve, and what it is the price per pound of putting a payload into orbit, or how many dollars per pound to put a satellite into orbit. So if it's a 10-pound satellite, how much? And versus the weight of that payload to orbit. So if you've got a 10,000-pound satellite you're putting to orbit, this curve that is shown here, and this is in tens of thousands of dollars, this curve is current state-of-the-art with one exception for vertical launch systems. So what that suggests is for a 10,000-pound satellite, it's about $10,000 a pound. So you can do the math. I think it's $10 million. Okay. As you go out to the bigger launch platforms, and they've got different launch vehicles plotted on here as to what they are. You know, you've got the Atlas V, the Delta II, the Delta IV. You know, they're deadlifting 50, 60, 70,000 pounds to orbit. These are big rockets. They weigh a couple of million pounds. These are impressively large pieces of hardware. And yet the price doesn't get much lower than about 5,000 pounds, $5,000 per pound to orbit. The one exception is down here, the Falcon 9, Elon Musk at SpaceX, based here in San Bernardino County, has found a way by completely changing how the rocket's put together. And they've got the price down to around $2,500, $2,800, $2,900 a pound. And it's because of the process and the way they do it. The interesting thing is that process that they use, this is a vertical rocket, can actually be applied to the same process for building a rocket that's air-launched. So you could actually get that delta gain in terms of lowering the cost on top of what you get from horizontal launch. What you have on the left is this is the Pegasus XL, about $32,000 a pound. Again, it's a 900-pound satellite to orbit. That's currently the only rocket that air launches anything to orbit. And it's obviously on the very low end of the scale. So what we're trying to do is get air launch out in this realm to take and lower that curve down into this realm, maybe 5,000 pounds or less. That would be significant and would change the economic market in a very beneficial way. And the goal of this is to transition the technology such that it benefits the U.S. companies that are putting satellites into orbit and giving the U.S. companies a competitive advantage, because the French are right there. In fact, in some ways, they're doing better than we are at the moment. So this is the concept. It's pretty simple. I've got an animation. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the idea is to tow a glider with a rocket attached. On the front of the rocket, there would be a satellite inside a fairing, tow it behind a transport. This just happens to show the SCAs. You can tell by the tail plates. Tow that to altitude. This is an artist concept that was thrown together pretty rapidly. It would not be a straight wing glider behind a swept wing transport. That doesn't work. Flight envelopes don't overlap. You'd hit the drag rise of transonic on the glider pretty quickly if you did that. So it'd probably be a swept wing glider. The other thing is this doesn't show the inverted wing, inverted V-shaped wing that we've got on the display model, but you would do that to get more ground clearance and then keep the landing gear a lot shorter than it would have to be. And then obviously you can either, we still haven't sorted out, but you could either cut away the tow plane and then release the rocket, or in the animation it shows the tow glider remaining attached and letting the rocket fall a little bit of a distance and then firing off the rocket, and it would climb back to altitude out in front of the tow plane. It's a safety issue. There's some pros and cons. This is the concept of operations. Instead of going through this, the animation does a better job, but we have that on one of the posters down on the display if you'd like to look at it after the presentation. Last summer, we had a high school student from Tehachapi High School who spent 7 weeks putting together an animation. And I'm going to show that animation. It's about 90 seconds. There's no audio. But it does a better job. This is the rocket sitting on it shows it on the runway, but it'd be an integration area off to the side. You integrate the glider onto the top of it, attach it up. You got the tow line attached. 1,500, 3,000 foot tow line, whatever makes the most sense, probably on the order of 2,000 feet. 747 or a larger transport, depends on the size of the rocket, size of the glider. Take off in tow. I thought the student did a phenomenal job actually with the cinematography of this, because it's pretty accurate in terms of what it would look like. So what this shows is there's the glider in tow with the rocket attached, and then you get to altitude, you basically would release the rocket, it falls away a safe distance, lights off the rocket motor, and literally it does look like that on a Pegasus. and it would fly on past the tow plane and out in front of it and climb up to altitude and release it through several stages to orbit and release the payload. And then you'd fly back to where you want to recover the glider, release it, glide it back in and land. This happens to show the North Lake Bed area at Edwards with Edwards Lake Bed. Dryden is right down here, Flight Test Center flight lines down here. But that's basically the concept. It's really not any more complex than that. The devil's in the details. You get a rocket or a glider that big with that much of a rocket on it, you know, and you got to think about it. I've had people say, well, what if you have a problem and you don't launch the rocket, or there's a problem with the rocket? You know, do you ditch the rocket and, you know, recover the UAV? Currently, in the state of the art in UAVs, is if you have a problem with the UAV, you have it go circle in an area until either you solve the problem or you let it crash in that area. In this case, the rocket probably costs an order of magnitude more than the airplane carrying it, and the satellite on the front of that probably costs an order of magnitude more than the rocket. So you kind of want to get all the parts of the system back if you don't launch it, so you can try again a week later once you sort it out.